Hey, folks, thanks for joining me for this episode from the Embellish Pod, an opportunity for me to ramble about whiskey or something for a few minutes. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Hopefully, I can be found on any podcasting platform that exists. And if you can't find me on a platform, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com and I'll get that taken care of. You can also find video versions of this podcast on YouTube. You can find all of my links on Instagram at embellishpod or TikTok with the same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. That is also a place to pick up these links, episode details, and more. Today we'll be having Lindsay from Barrell join us again. And they've had a whole lot of things that have happened since the last time that she and I were able to chat. They opened their blending facility. They launched their new bottom price product of the Foundation series. They have launched the New Year series, and there's been some labels and things that might have snuck out onto social media indicating some things that are changing for them. And so stick around and listen to the conversation that Lindsay and I have about all of the things that are going on with Barrell and will continue to go on with Barrell. All right, so this afternoon we have Lindsay joining us again from Barrell Craft Spirits. When we finished last time, I said I still had a handful of questions, if not more, that I wanted to continue on, and one of those being around the new year. But before we get to that, and we talked about this a little bit off air, but the last time we chatted, I had not seen your new facility yet. Now I have, and it sounds like you haven't had the opportunity to see it in its complete state yet. But maybe the first question I have is who do we need to bribe to get back into the speakeasy area? Because that was one of the neatest portions of that tour for me was you guys have this little speakeasy place that's built maybe for barrel picks or whatever, but kind of give me an idea on that.
Yeah, of course. I don't know if they have actually the plans on how they're going to manage that speakeasy area, but it's located between a conference room and the blending lab, so not the most convenient of locations. But I mean, what speakeasy is, to be honest. But I definitely think that we are going to be using that for like barrel picks, for groups, for accounts. It's a great little tucked away bar that is perfect to taste um, all the barrel products in. I'm just not sure what their plan is yet with that. I think we're still trying to finish building out the facility in all its
Yeah,
glory. You saw how
yeah,
massive
that's
it was, though.
yeah. No, it's a huge facility, and it's a lot like any build project. You get done enough to move into it, and then you spend the next 5 years trying to button up the last 5% of the build. You know, I've got we moved into this house that I live in right now about 10 years ago, and there's still a piece of molding that needs to go up right over here. So that's just sort of the way things often go. Um, Inside the new facility, there's also or there was a retail store. Is that going to continue to be open to the public where people can come in and purchase things, or is that was that just for the day of the event?
No, that actually is being built out. Really exciting about the retail store and the facility. There's some old batches that you won't be able to get like in any market currently. So if
Mhm.
you are a big barrel fan and you want to try some of our older batches, you'll be able to find them in the retail store. If you're in Kentucky, it's definitely worth stopping by. They run some sales there that you won't be able to find in other places. So especially in control states. So if you're in a control state and you want to stop by to Kentucky, you should stop by the barrel store. So you'll have all of the items that are available in other markets too that you might not be able to get.
Well, and you already stole my next question because I was going to say, are you guys going to put out any old batches in the retail shop like everybody else does? And you are. So that's now it becomes a thing that everybody puts on their checklist of things to do when they're in Louisville, proper doing whiskey tours. It's, we need to stop by the retail shop and see what's sitting on the shelf there because you might be able to sneak into some stuff. Um, the last time we talked, we talked a little bit about Barrel Rye Batch 4 and Bourbon Batch 35. Those subsequently have been put on Fred Minnick's Top 100, and you know, whiskey people can kind of go one way or the other with Fred and some of his opinions. But at the end of the day, it's a pretty significant achievement. What does that do for you as an employee for the brand? That kind of recognition.
It's amazing. I mean, we've consistently been on Fred Minnick's best of lists since I started working at the company 3 years ago. I mean, when Seagrass won number two whiskey of the year with his pick, we sold out of all of our distributors. So there's definitely a following there. I think the fact that we have our batches on the list now, just as a testament to what Barrell has been doing for 10 years. I mean, batch 35 is our 35th batch. We started the company with batch 1. I think the batches keep getting better as we like learn how to blend better, and I think like over the last decade we've like perfected blending. Batch 35 is really well balanced. It's a blend of like 6 to 13-year-old bourbons from Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee. It's built on a 6 to 8-year-old blend of like high rye bourbons with some 8-year-olds that has like butterscotch and cherry notes blended into it. So you get that on the mid palate, and then some 13-year-old Tennessee stuff to round it out. But it's a really well balanced, like high rye, still kind of rich and savory style bourbon. And then that rye batch 4, I am a rye girl. I'm just a big fan of rye, like
Mhm.
generally, always. The rye is really great. It's an Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Canadian blend. So 5 to 14-year-old blend. Obviously, the older stuff is going to be some of that Canadian, but there's a bunch of 10-year Indiana, so that 95.5 mash bill that like kind of is the base of that blend. And then some younger Kentucky and Tennessee and Indiana rye blended in and then finished with some 14-year-old Canadian. So you get all that stuff, that good stuff from the American rye, like that spice, that kind of like sweetness, a little bit of a richness to it. But then you get that green apple and brightness from the Canadian rye. Just really pretty, well balanced, elegant rye whiskey. I think the rye is going to do better than the bourbon, but like maybe that's just because I like rye better than bourbon. But the rye is fantastic. It's probably one of my favorite releases this year that we've released.
Mhm.
So if you've been sleeping on the rye, you should definitely go out and get rye batch 4. We haven't released a rye since 2020, and that's when I started with the company. And I was a big fan of rye batch 3. We were really focusing on developing seagrass, so we kind of took a pause on that. So I was really excited when the rye batch 4 came out.
Yeah, and I'll agree with the blend of batch 4. And you mentioned there's some pretty standard 95.5 rye that's in there that everybody sort of lays the foundation of understanding of what rye is. But the other items, the other components that you put in that blend, I think make it something greater than I'll say greater than 95, because 95.5 rye is still great, but the blend really shines here, I think. And I'll agree with you. I was one of those people that 10 years ago, if you'd asked me if I like rye, I'm like, no, I don't like rye. But
Hmm.
that was usually founded on one time that you drank rye, and it may not have been a great rye to begin with. And so I've found later on that there's as much variation in rye as there is any other type of whiskey, and stuff like these blends really expand the profile of rye, right? Because there's a lot of expected it's going to be dill and spicy, but there can also be a host of other candy flavors and apple and all of these different things, and the batch 4 truly does do that. So after we talked, you guys released obviously the 10-year celebration release bottle, which is phenomenal. But I don't think there's any of that anymore to be
So
purchased at this point. But it's year over year, it feels like you guys just keep hitting on blockbusters, right? Because I think that 4 and 35 were great. My numbers right there? I think it's right. Yeah,
yeah.
4 and 35 are great. And then the 10 year is a phenomenal blend. But then you hit this new thing, which is kind of new to the brand, is the foundation, right? Which is your 5 year 100 proof. It's the only one that I know of so far that is non-barrel proof, with a lower age statement, but it's an evergreen. And the first time I got to taste it, I wouldn't have told you that that was a 5 year whiskey if I'd have tasted it blind, right? I would have felt closer
Yeah.
to 8, 9, 10 years is what I would have felt
Wow.
like. There,
And
it is phenomenal.
beautiful packaging too.
Hmm. So what this feels almost out of left field for Barrel. What puts you in the position where you're like, hey, we want to not put out this like a crazy blend. We want something that's standard, that's evergreen, that's 5 years, it's 100 proof. Like where does this diversion or divergence come from?
I think what I've learned at Barrel over the last 3 years is that never say never, right? Like, there's always, like, this room for innovation and for something new to come out. I think that once they bought the Rick House, which allowed us to keep a lot more barrels close to us in Kentucky and expanded our facility where we have, like, 4 6,000-gallon blending tanks and like a few 8,000-gallon blending tanks, it kind of increases our ability to make something that is going to remain consistent and a larger amount of it in the blending. And we really wanted to be sensitive to the consumer's price point because we've been consistently crushing things that are 80 to $90 a bottle, but we really wanted to make something that you can cocktail with and you can drink neat as well as cocktail with, because I think that though this is a 5-year age stated bourbon, there's 5 to 9-year-old bourbons in this. It doesn't drink like a 5-year-old bourbon to me. It has
Mhm.
this like richness to it. It still has that texture that you're expecting from Barrel. But I think that that's where we were this year. We had the new facility. It was large enough to kind of like take on this big project. And it is the only thing that we actually use water as an ingredient in. So they had to build that out. That we had
Mhm.
to like adjust and like build out having water as an ingredient. And so we are very skilled blenders, and this was an entirely new challenge for us and the blending. Well, not me personally, but challenge for
Mhm.
the blending team. I was very excited as being a part of the sales team to go out and sell this. Really excited for my on-premise accounts. It's going to be game changing in terms of like old fashions. We really wanted to compete with those bigger names that you see, like Jim Beam, Four Roses, something that's going to be blended to be consistent, really easy drinking. It's not
Mhm.
easy drinking because it's still 100 proof, but when your palate is attuned to, cask strength stuff, it
Right.
feels really nice, still rich. It's not every occasion calls for, like, a few cask strength cocktails. Do you know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Yeah, and it definitely tastes older than its statement without being caustic, right? Because you can get kind of into the higher age ranges and it starts getting out of hand and you can't be at 100 proof. And you said something in there that I hadn't thought of until you actually said it out loud. It makes a ton of sense. Is that you're having to deal with water as an ingredient now, where you hadn't in the past because you were just blending barrels together, and so you didn't have to understand. And maybe you do after you've put your blend together. You want to see how your blend, holds up to a drop of water here or there. But this is a different creature where you're adding water into a blend that you've already created, and you got to deal with the exothermic reaction. There's a whole host of things that kind of go into play there, and I could geek out on that for a while, but I think the piece that is the most interesting to me, at least here recently, is there's been a lot of conversation in the whiskey marketplace around pricing and price point adjustments because we're seeing, you know, most whiskey prices are inflating a little bit, and it's meeting just standard inflation that happens in the North American marketplace, but um, you guys had, what you could see maybe is like four price tiers, and now you've added a fifth one, but your fifth one was added on the bottom end, whereas everybody else may be going premium. And so you're sitting in a 50-ish dollar range and an 80-ish dollar range and 100-ish dollar range, 160-ish, and then 300. And so you kind of run this broad spectrum. Um, do you make these decisions because you see there's a place for 54? Is it exactly what you're saying? Like, I want to, have something for the on premise sales, or tap into a new market, or is this a trend you see happening in all of whiskey, where everybody's going to have to start, identifying that lower tier for themselves?
That's a really great question. I think just being in stores a lot lately and doing a lot of in-store tastings, I mean, this is the season for that. I think people are a lot more price conscious than they were 3 years ago. I'm selling a lot more. I mean, everyone's excited about foundation, so that might be skewing the sales for me, but a lot more of that $55 price point's an easier buy. It's a buy that you can make multiple times, like a month
Mhm.
as well. Whereas like Barrel might be a buy that's like once a month for like Seagrass or Vantage or Dovetail. But this one is like a buy that you can make a little bit more often. But I am seeing like that the price points and also just the amount of bottles that people are buying has fallen off over the last like few years. Just generally, the store owners are telling us that stores are a little bit slower year over year. So we're finding that
Yeah,
whether it's
and it
inflation or just people getting out from COVID. So,
Right, yeah, they're spending money on travel now more than they
yeah.
were 3 years ago, significantly so, but, and I think, whiskey's meant to be shared, and, if we're talking about sharing things and I have the opportunity to share a $55 bottle that's at 100 proof, I'm not gonna get, nearly as cautious around, is somebody gonna put this in a glass of Coke, and make a whiskey and Coke out of it, which
Yeah,
it can do perfectly fine with. But if you've got a $300 bottle, you sort of hate to see that happen, right?
yeah.
Whereas this one maybe adds a different aspect for people, but I feel that it's a great place to also introduce people to more nuanced and complex whiskey that doesn't exist at that price point, right? And so, for the person who's only used to drinking a $30 or $40 bottle, you show them this, and it's drinks significantly out of its price class.
It drinks out of its price class. It also appeals to people that normally don't drink cask strength whiskey, where
Mhm.
they'll taste it in a lineup. I can't tell you how many times I've been like, "Please don't shoot this. Like, take a tiny sip first,
Yeah.
take a second sip, add a drop of water. Here's a water dropper for you."
Mhm.
But people are like, "This is way too hot for me," because they're not used to drinking that. They'll drink like Baileys or Fireball or like,
Right.
there are people that like that sort of thing, and I think
Mhm.
that this is gonna bring like, kind of widen our range of consumers too, and maybe bring people into the brand, and, like, your tongue is a muscle, so once you start drinking things at 100 proof, you might want a little bit more, and then you start noticing how much more flavor you're getting from something that's a little bit higher proof. So it's a good way to open the door to the brand, and I think we needed something like that in our portfolio.
Yeah, and it definitely opened the door to the brand. And so you've launched this, and it's had a month and a half in the marketplace. Is it hitting the expectation that you had for it? Is it exceeding it? Is it kind of underneath it? Where are you landing on this launch?
So we didn't launch it in every
Mm,
single market, but
mhm.
I'm, launching it right now in my territory. I cover the Northeast, so in New York and New Jersey, and it's gone over very successfully so far. I've been taking it to on-premise accounts, and off-premise accounts too. So it's been very successful. I've done a tasting recently in Jersey City where it was on a Saturday afternoon from 2 to 5, and we sold maybe like 6 bottles of it, and people are just bringing it to parties. They're just like, "Oh, perfect. I'm gonna bring this to, like, my friend's Christmas party, Friendsgiving, or wherever they're
Mhm.
going." And or like, "I'm gonna give this as a gift to somebody," because it's at that price point where it's like, they're not your best friend, but they're an acquaintance or they're
Mhm.
your brother-in-law or something like that, and you just
They're
need
worth
something.
more than a bottle of Fireball, but not quite at like a gray or gold label.
Yeah, and it's new and it's
Mhm.
exciting and it's 100 proof. It's not like it's 80 proof. It's
Mhm.
still it still kinda carries weight there. But yeah, it's been going over really well, and I'm excited to see how much better it goes once it's, like, launched in every single market in
Yeah.
the country.
And just as a talk, not as a talking point, but as a definition, I know what off premise and on premise is, but for somebody who's hopping on and has never heard those terms before, off premise versus on premise, what are the
Yes.
difference between those two things?
So on premise is where you consume beverages on that premise, so like restaurants and bars, and off premise is retail accounts. So you're buying a bottle, you're not opening it there, you're taking it home with you where you consume it or
Okay.
wherever you're going to consume it.
Yeah. So, everything is effectively batched at this point. Um, are we going to look for like a vintage approach here where each year is going to be slightly different on the foundation, or you're going to do the brand's going to do the dead level best to make sure it tastes the same now as it does 5 years from now?
Yes, that is the answer. The latter. So we're blending this for consistency. It's not going to
Hmm.
be batched like Vantage Seagrass or Dovetail. The
Hmm.
reason why we took so long to release Foundation was because we needed to the Rick House and the big blending facility to be able to produce something like this consistently. We've bought barrels specifically for this blend for years. So we've stocked up for a long time for enough to be able to produce foundation at a consistent level and you'll always expect it to kind of remain the same flavor profile wise.
Hmm. And I think that'll be really, really nice because that's one of the things that I've always sort of felt. Create FOMO, right? Is there's a really good barrel batch that comes out, it sits on the shelf, and I had to pick something else the week before, and I come back and it's gone, and there's not any more of it. And it's like, oh, that may have been the best one yet. I don't know yet. I haven't tried it or whatever. But having a consistent bottle that I know that I can pick up that is going to be phenomenal is it's super nice. I appreciate that from a consumer standpoint. And that wasn't the last release you've had so far this year. Now we're into the new year, right? And so it's the new year release, which is a handful of different states, right? One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight. 8. Is it 8 different states on this blend?
Um, yep.
Yeah, yeah, it's 8 different states, which is pretty significant. But even beyond that, each state has, or several of the states have multiple different years that are available, right, from it. And so, how do you go about? How does this get created with this many different states in the blend?
So I know that like Barrell always pushes the envelope just generally, but our bourbon batches, though they are blended to be like different every single release, they're usually your traditional places that you're finding bourbon, right? They're like Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee. Those are usually the blends. I know Batch 30 had Wyoming bourbon in it too, but New Year bourbon is it's our excuse and our way to celebrate the entire year and kind of pushing the envelope a little bit by including some states and some distilleries and producers that you normally won't see, and then blending it into tasting something like delicious. I love the New Year bourbon because we get to focus on just not those big heavy hitters in terms of states and producers, but we get to feature some like smaller states that you don't realize bourbon might be coming from, like New York and Maryland and Ohio and Texas and Wyoming. So I just really love these blends. I think I bring them every year to Christmas Eve and like everyone tastes it. And my mom even likes it, who even puts like ice in her wine. So I'm just
Mhm.
like, these are just very like easy drinking, joyful. They have like a lot more fruit. They're very generous on the palate. Um, I think that they're fantastic ways to celebrate the year. But this is a blend of 5 to 15-year-old bourbon, so there's stuff from everywhere. I can rattle off all the different ages from all the different states, but now moving forward, you'll be able to find all that information on the back label. We also include a derived mash bill on the back label of these blends too. And this one has, if anyone is a wheated bourbon fan out there, this is 1% wheat in it. So
Yeah.
it's 72% corn, 22% rye, 5% malted barley, and then 1% wheat. So it does have that like nice richness to it. It's kind of
Mhm.
rounded out. It's got that malt flavor profile.
And one of the things I think that's unique about this is you have these derived mash bills. And so if I look at this from a traditional bourbon drinker's viewpoint, right, I say, well, 1% wheat is not very much. But the reality is that 1% wheat was a part of a barrel that may have had significantly more wheat, and then it aged. And what it comes out as is a wheated whiskey. And so you're really talking, not a wheated whiskey or wheated bourbon, wheated whatever. Um, it has a different impact than if it was just 1% of the actual mash bill to begin with, right? If you just, if I went and got out all the ingredients and made this whiskey, it's not going to taste like this blend does. And I think it's apparent, at least for um, this particular bottle. I didn't I couldn't get past the nose of it to drink it, and not in a bad way. Like every time I went back to smelling it, I got something new and different. It evolved a whole lot. I mean, I did eventually drink it, but it was like, it was one of those that I didn't want to drink it, because once you drink it, then you smell it and it's different, because you've got the alcohol that's inside. There's a lot of complexity, and it can only come from, being from 5 to 15 years old, and 8 different states, and this, effective 4 grain mash bill. um I don't know what else to say other than this is one of the best New Year's I've had yet. And I've had since 2020, I've had every year's New Year's. And maybe it's because I don't have some of those to compare directly against anymore, but it's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, I like this year a lot. I get a lot of that cinnamon and like that apple cider and that all of those like fall flavors that you
Mhm.
usually get, like holiday flavors. I really think they capture it in the new year bourbon. It's not like sweet by any means, but you do get like some of that like snickerdoodle and cinnamon. So I just really do appreciate the blends every year. And we only make about 1,800 cases of it. So it's a very limited run. Um, Really, it's like an allocated bourbon too, so that's why I
and,
also
and, and it and it smells and tastes like an allocated bourbon as well. That's where I'm sitting. I've been a little bit of a barrel fan for a while, and it just sort of seems to increase year over year as you put out new things, whether it's Armida or Seagrass or the Foundation or the Amberana or the Tale of Two Casks, which I'm nursing the very small amount that's left in my bottle of that because it's probably the most interesting whiskey I've had in years at this point. Um, you guys are achieving this by blending a lot of different things. And one of the things that I came across, Vine Pair marks your master blender as the master blender of the year, right? And it's got to be pretty phenomenal, or pretty impactful. Can you
Yeah,
talk a
Nick
little bit about your
Christensen
blender?
is fantastic. We have a blending team, so there's 3 people on the blending team. You have Trip Stimson, who is our chief whiskey scientist, Nick Christensen, who is our blender, and she manages all the blending operations, and then Joe Beatrice, who's our founder. So there's 3 completely different palettes that go into this, but Nick is so detail-oriented. She is fantastic. She's so patient. She walks you through all the processes. She kind of explains to me how, like, nuanced blending is because you can have this you can blend like in the small scale blending lab, think things are going to work, and then when you blend it large, like in it's angry for a while. It needs some time to kind of integrate and adjust. So she'll like start tasting. So when we say sometimes foundation, it's finished in those barrel, not foundation, Vantage, for instance, is finished in the barrels from anywhere from 2 to 12 months, is because you don't really know until something is not angry anymore when they're starting to integrate with each other. And there's a component blends that go into larger blends. And I didn't know like everything was so layered together. So it just there's a lot of that goes behind it, a lot of detail, a lot of tasting. And Nick has a lot of integrity, which I really respect. She always tastes everything blind. She really strives to keep her palate really honest. And I think that you can tell with the blends that we've been coming out with over the last few years since Nick joined the team. But she is just phenomenal, and we're really lucky to have her, and everyone else on the team too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you don't get to this point without a fantastic team. And I know while we were at the event on site back in September, at this point, that was that long ago now. Joe had sort of joked like, "Hey, he's on the blending team, but he's really there is like they've already decided. They kick it over to him, and he's like, yeah, this is good. Like that's the mark that he's sort of giving now. I imagine he's probably soft playing his role a little bit, um, but whatever comes out, obviously he's been around this for a while, right? He's been around because he's part of the founding team of this. Um, there's different, ages of I don't know what the term I'm looking for is here. Levels of experience, I guess. Maybe there's different levels of experience here between Trip, between Dro, and between Nick. And when you make a decision by committee, sometimes you can come to a greater decision than you can as an individual, I guess is what I'm really getting at, is that the teamwork really does become a key function of the success of this.
And you have like different palettes, right? So everyone has a different opinion. At least you have 3 people. So when you have like the vote that kind of it's either 2 versus 1, it's all 3, it's 1 versus 3. You know what I mean? You have that deciding factor in there. So you need 3 to kind of balance it out. And sometimes things that Trip likes, Joe and Nick disagree on, or sometimes things that Joe like, Trip and Nick disagree on. So there's a tiebreaker in that like trifecta there.
So, I've got a I've got a handful more questions, but I did want to ask: is there anything we should be looking at in the new year, not in the New Year whiskey, but in the new year that Barrel might be doing that we can keep our eyes on?
Yeah, totally. I know we're working on something that we don't even know about yet, but
Mhm.
we're going to structure our release schedule so that there's 2 batches that come out and then 2 cask finish bourbons that come out. So, like we had the cask finish bourbon finished in Amberana and the cask finish bourbon finished in a Tale of Two Islands barrels, you should expect sometime in the spring. Uh, a new, I know it was released on Coming Whiskey on Instagram. So if anyone follows that, you'll see that label out there, but it's going to be a Mizunara finish, a cask finish
Mhm.
bourbon. And those are, we only do about 2,000 cases of each of those cask finish bourbons. So once it's gone, it's kind of gone. We might release it in a few years, but there's going to be years in between our releases. And there's not any promises that that finish will come out again. but you should expect that in the spring, and that's the only one that I know about, and then batch 36, obviously, but I just don't know when the other ones will be coming out, but
Yeah.
expect them to, or what they will be, but expect them to there to be a fall release, maybe a summer release. You'll have a new year, 2025.
Mhm. And it seems, Coming Whiskey has a really good knack for like spoiling the surprise for some folks, and he's got a really growing population of people. And I'll admit, I did see that. I absolutely saw that come across, and I was like, I need to mark this in because Mizunara is a really really unique finish, and you don't see it almost at all in bourbon, and it has a lot to do with the wood and how you can get access to that type of wood. Um, are you able to talk about how you guys got access to Mizunara or no?
I'm not sure if I'm able to talk about it. I just don't they haven't told us how they
Okay.
have. I know that we bought the barrels,
Mhm.
so and that they're very expensive.
Yeah.
So and they're really hard to find. But and we do finish some of our bourbon in Mizunara already for the Vantage,
Mhm.
so that's an ongoing release. Some bourbon is finished in the Mizunara, and now we're gonna be coming out with I'm really excited about this release because I'm curious to see what that is like just
Mhm.
in pure Mizunara barrels and not toasted American and French oak. So I think the cask finish series is going to teach me a lot about just wood and teach every consumer about wood and how the wood finishes affect the bourbon.
And that's straight up in the whiskey geeks, and we talked about this offline. But you guys are developing a really nurturing relationship between whiskey geeks and content creators and yourselves, and doing stuff like this just makes it even worse. Like we're all super attached to this because we want to know all of the different wood, how it's going to impact whiskey. We want to know about Amberana. We want to know about Hungarian oak, and we want to know about Mizunara, any new wood that comes up, like, oh, I wonder what whiskey tastes like out of that thing. So we're always going to be there for it. I know, Mizunara is a difficult wood to deal with because it can be super leaky and it's super expensive to get. And they don't regularly harvest Mizunara because it's really, really old trees before they get to that point. And so um, that's when I saw it pop into the Vantage, I was like, okay, that makes sense as a component of a blend because maybe you can't get enough to do a full release of it. But then, a year later, we see it pop up on Coming Whiskey's page. Um, it's an eager. I think we're gonna have an eager crowd of folks that are gonna buy that, and it probably won't last very long on the shelf. So, um, anybody who happens to listen to this or watch this probably needs to go and sign up for notifications on Barrel's website so you can find
Yeah.
out anything new that comes in.
Yeah, sign up for our
Because
newsletter. It goes out.
yeah, the newsletters are regular and they are informative. I will say that I've been following them since before we ever did an interview, and it was a great way to pick up these things. Um, so New Year has hit most markets at this point. Well, I think all
Yep.
markets at this point. Vantage, not Vantage, sorry, Foundation is rolling out still across the United States. Um, what does distribution look like? I guess can I buy this from the website? Is on premise versus on premise? We already covered a little bit, but what are my options to buy this? Buy
Foundation.
anything? Mhm.
So I'm not entirely sure what other states it's going to be rolled out in, but I know it's gonna we've been working on rolling it out. It should be rolled out everywhere by January 1st, though. So it should
Mhm.
be at at least by the end of February, you should be able to find it on all of our open markets and all of our states. I know control states, it takes a little bit of time to approve it and stuff. So just give us a little bit of time next year. I think by February we should be having it in all of the open markets. So
And I got a notification the other day from a friend of mine that was traveling in a state that I'm not going to say out loud because I don't want anybody to start looking, but there may be a bottle of an infinite barrel sitting on a shelf somewhere in a retail space that he's going back to pick up for me. And so I'm super excited about that because it's not something that's readily still available, and it's a project that we talked about last time. Um, I guess is there anything else specific that you want to jump into? Because I can go back to the new year. I want to talk about the new year and the number of states and how these things kind of play out. But I want to make sure we cover anything that you needed to cover.
well, if you're talking about, like, releases that we're not no longer going to be blending,
Mhm.
Infinite Barrel, but also Armida,
Mhm.
sadly, which is one of my favorite things. Actually, when I interviewed for the job, I went over Armida as one of the items that in my interview that I was excited about. But we are not having any plans to blend Armida again in the
Mhm.
foreseeable future. So if you find it on a shelf, grab it, pick it up. It is one of my favorites. It's a blend of Indiana and Tennessee bourbon finished in Sicilian Amaro, Jamaican rum, and pear brandy. But just so everyone knows, probably not going to release that next year, and whatever is out there at this
Mhm.
point.
Well, so I'm gonna have to cut that out because I don't want anybody to know that I'm gonna go buy them myself, so that way I have a longer supply of it, right?
It's like a
Um,
retired Beanie Baby at this point, you know?
exactly. Yes, it becomes the Beanie Baby collection, but hopefully this whiskey will fare far better than Beanie Babies did over time because they didn't end up super well. So if I look at the list of states that are on this bottle, and this is maybe a weird question, are they in any specific order, right? So how do these get arranged? Is it just design or is there like some reasoning behind it?
I have no idea. That's a great question. I don't know if they're doing it in it's clear that they're not doing it in alphabetical order.
Hmm.
I don't know if they're doing it in, like, what component blends, like, what how much of a particular state
So
is
that
in
was
there.
that was the question was
Not
is it
not
like, Kentucky makes the largest part of the component and then the next one down or the next one over? I don't know if it's like a left to right or if it's a top to bottom and then roll over to the next one, but either way, it was do these make the majority or is it just like from a design component, this is the best way that we could put these states together?
probably let me look at the label. It might just be from a design component and it looks kinda even. Yeah, maybe a design component. I'm honestly not I know that we fought to get transparency on the labels, and
Mhm,
we all agreed that, like, we should definitely have be transparent, but we also are
mhm,
transparent to a certain level. We don't want people replicating the proprietary blends. So I
right,
don't think that they would list them in terms of, like, how much is there because that's giving a little bit too much information away.
mhm.
Um, yeah, so I don't think that there is probably a rhyme or reason, but I will find that question out for our next one if there's a rhyme or reason to, like, the order of how they're listed on the back label.
Yeah,
I'm
and
really
I
excited
hadn't
that
paid.
they're listed on the back label, though. That's, like, incredible to me that we have all those age statements. It makes my job easier. I used to have to, like, sit there with note cards and memorize, like, all the stuff that was in the blends,
Mhm.
so going forward, I could just flip the bottle around and be like, "Hey."
Yeah, and the risk is this, and I don't say if risk is the right term there, but as soon as you put certain states on the label, people start having some preconceived notions, and this is the thing that I think that you guys have done. There's a couple other people out there that do blending that have done this really well. Is that your blends incorporate the whiskeys without bringing along the justification for some people's preconceived notions about certain whiskey. Like there's a distinct group of people that feel that Tennessee whiskey tastes a certain way.
Mhm.
But that way does not show up in your blend in their mindset. And so I think that's the risk and the reward at this point is being able to showcase these whiskeys and say, nah, it's really not what you think it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I think everyone comes into every I mean, stereotypes exist for a reason. Things
Mhm,
could people have preconceived notions of things, but I think what Barrel does is kind of I mean, people are like, "Oh, I hate this type of flavor," and a
mhm,
chef can make a dish with that ingredient in it, and it doesn't emphasize that particular type of flavor. I mean, if you're talking about Tennessee, I grew up on Flintstone vitamins. I can definitely taste when things are, like, a little bit I was scarred by those growing up.
mhm,
And so I don't like that flavor profile, but I don't think that you can taste it in the majority of our batches, and people will insist that just because it says Tennessee, it's from Dickel, but I don't we work with 50 different
yep,
more than 50 different distilleries from around the country, like, it's not that's not the only one we work with from Tennessee. So, I think making assumptions doesn't do anyone any favors, and I don't think that it's necessarily about the components that we're putting into these blends. We're putting in so many different components, sometimes as much as a barrel, sometimes as much as a 750 bottle
mhm,
in a 4,000 to 6,000 gallon blend to kind of change the flavor profile. So if you're going to tell me that a 750 bottle of Dickel in a 6,000 gallon blend you're going to taste, like I'll give you an award. These blends are not about what's going into them. They're about what they taste like afterwards. But it's interesting and nerdy to know what is going into them because it's fun. Like, that's a fun part of the blend.
mhm.
But we're blending for flavor profile. We're not blending to be like, "This is what this does to this blend." Like, we're blending to get a flavor profile. And I think that's what Joe's role is, right? Joe will task someone with the task of like blending for a certain flavor profile or saying that he wants something like that, and he will make sure it comes out that way. Because for instance, with Seagrass, he gave the task of he wanted a rye, he wanted it to have 3 finishes, and he wanted it to taste like how seagrass tastes, like fruity, floral, bright, refreshing, something that you would drink in the summertime, and it took like 2 years or, like, almost 2 years to blend that and figure out the blend, and it became my favorite whiskey that we've ever put out, besides probably Rye Batch 4, because I
Mhm.
just like blends of rye. So,
Right. Yeah, I mean, rye blends.
grass,
And
bottle, but
you made a really good point in there when you said, if people feel like they can taste, one bottle in a 6,000 gallon blend, they should get an award. Honestly, they should probably get a job at that point, because I think they're probably even beating like computer analysis of whiskey at that point, being able to say, "Oh no, I know exactly where this came from." Um, it, some of this, when I look at the states on these lists, I now have to start like googling where could it be from, like Maryland, like what distilleries are in Maryland that you could possibly be getting whiskey from, and um, it may be shedding some light on other distilleries, whether it's intentional or not, that are making quality whiskey that people should be paying attention to, because Kentucky, Indiana, Tennessee, we can all kind of stack hands on knowing who those might be, but you get into Maryland, you get into Wyoming, to New York to a certain degree, although I think New York's getting a whole lot more recognition in the whiskey game in the last 6 months year than maybe prior to that. And then Texas has its own reputation in and of itself. But now I'm trying to figure out, like, where in Maryland is whiskey coming from? I enjoy that, I think.
yeah, I and it's fun, and sometimes we're getting stuff from distilleries that maybe don't release a bourbon, and they sell their bourbon barrels, like, it's it's fair you can or we buy them from brokers, like, instead of
Hmm.
distilleries, like, so you never know exactly, but I think that what I really like about Barrell, though, since the beginning when I first started working for them is that they're transparent about where things are coming from. They say where it's distilled. Yes, we're from Kentucky. We're based in Louisville and we're bottle and blend everything there. So the art does happen there, but the distillation happens other places. And it's nice to know that there's like at least a little bit of provenance to where the barrels are coming from listed on the back label. So,
In provenance, there's a whole host of these French wine terms that are coming into play into whiskey, and I really like it because there's not an English equivalent for the idea of provenance. And the same thing with cuvee, or I talked to a guy in Ireland yesterday about some of this, but it's nice to the transparency is appreciated from the consumer's viewpoint as well, I think, and I think that's you see some rewarding from that. And I had the opportunity last week. I hosted a blind tasting for a group of people with a really mixed level of experience with whiskey, and what we really did was just on the legality of whiskey, and we spent a good portion of time talking about the difference between produced by, bottled by, and distilled by, because you have a lot of brands that will say produced by or bottled by, um, but they never really indicate where it's distilled. And a lot of
yep.
times it's because they're sourcing their whiskey from somewhere else, and whether it be because they've got a NDA or some other reason they can't say who they bought it from, they're still not being transparent that they specifically didn't do it. And a lot of times you can put 3 or 4 distinctly different bottles on the countertop and say, "Let's taste these," and they're all the exact same distillery that made it, but there's no indication. And so, do you think there's any appetite or interest for pushing for more transparency from a legal standpoint within the state of Kentucky or the federal government at this point, or do you just say we're going to do what we're going to do, and maybe the market dictates everybody else has to?
That's a loaded question, to be honest. I think there should be transparency on the labels. Um, I think the pendulum swings both ways, right? I mean, when
Mhm.
Dovetail came out, they wanted us to consider to categorize it as something to be on the same shelf as like Fireball would be with the TTB because it
Mhm.
was finished in different casks. Now there's so many brands that are coming out that are finishing things in different things that you're just like, "There's a cask for that?" So I definitely think that there needs to be guardrails and regulations, and I think that there should be a push for transparency, but I don't want that push to be so limiting that it hinders
Mhm.
innovation. Because you see this in, like, bringing it back to wine, but you see this with, like, wine where it's like could be like in Italy, for instance, like DOCG, DOC, you have to follow certain rules. In France, AOC, you have to follow certain rules, but it limits innovation and creativity in a certain way because like that at least that wine is going to be classic, varietally correct, and have quality. But there should be, maybe we should like adopt that into whiskey where like if you want to be considered a certain type of whiskey, like you have to follow certain rules. And if you want to exist outside those rules, you can, and it could be still considered a whiskey, but like not on the same level. Like maybe
Mhm.
that could work because like there needs to be some guardrails though. It's getting a little out of hand out there.
Yeah,
It's like
because
the craft
I've
beer
seen
world.
like strawberry toast finished whiskey, and that's not a real thing. And I understand that they're finding a barrel that had some strawberry brandy that nobody's ever going to drink, and they age it in that, and they've got a toasted barrel, so now they've got strawberry toast is the name of it, but it can be really really misleading. Whereas you guys are giving a brand and then brand name, right? So Dovetail is a really really good example. It's the brand name is Dovetail, and then you say this is what we're finished in, right? These are the types of casks that exist instead of trying to blueberry brandy or some other thing that's not real. But
It's
then I
like
have to
craft
caution myself.
beer.
What's
It's like
that?
it's like the craft beer world. Like it just like got a little bit out of hand, okay? Like I
Hmm.
really loved the craft beer world for a while, and then like all the lactose and like I don't know, just got like way too way too much.
It's the point when which innovation is unchecked and it creates what is the phrase from Jurassic Park? They never stopped asking. They asked if they could, not if they should, basically, right? Like you
Yeah.
can do it, but doesn't mean you should do it. And I know I slaughtered that, and somebody who actually likes Jurassic Park is going to go look that up and be like, no, this is what he said. But the intent is that they can explore that. But then I also have to caution myself because even in the Scotch realm, they finish in sherry on a regular basis, but there's not a large enough sherry market to generate the number of butts that they need to actually age in. And so there's a lot of people that are making sherry and pouring it out because they just
Mhm.
need the butts to age scotch in. And so at least it's actually a spirit that some people do consume. It's just, they outstrip the demand or the need. So it, I appreciate the approach to transparency in any way that you can get there. And there's a couple of people, a couple of brands in the industry that are doing that. And I would hope and expect to see the rest of the brands follow suit, whether they're legally required to or not, because consumers are, especially if consumers start tightening their purse strings and being more discerning in their purchases, they're likely also going to want to understand even better if I'm going to part with my hard earned money,
Yep.
I need to know what you have.
Yep. I actually now knowing what I know over the last few years, I look at bottles like I often on the shelf and I'm like, does it say where it's distilled in? And a
Hmm.
lot of the times, I would say at least 60 to 70% of the time does not. Like at
Yeah.
least for the independent, not the bigger brands, obviously, but the smaller ones. I'm like, oh, I wonder where that's distilled. It doesn't say.
Well,
It says produced
well,
in
even
or
yeah,
bottled in.
even with the bigger brands, I mean, if you think of some of these brands that have multi-site distilling, right, that are a large brand, if they get down to the city or county, it may be different from bottle to bottle because they've got a still in one county and a still in another county, and they're both generating for the exact same thing. But if you get that geographic, then you start getting confusion in your own brand. And so it's not just the small folks that are obscuring it, and maybe through realistic intent or through some malfeasant intent that they're trying to obscure what they're doing. But you guys aren't, so we're not going to talk about them anymore. We're going to talk about what you guys are doing. Um, so can you look back at this year and say this was a really successful year for Barrel? Does it meet your expectation? I know you're in the sales industry, and so you probably have KPIs or OKRs or sales metrics that you have to hit every single year, and those don't always tell the entire story of what success is. And so, um, looking at what your brand has achieved, do you like, is this like a plus, is this a B? Maybe that's loaded because you're getting towards the end of the year where it's time for year end reviews, and you don't want somebody watching where Lindsay said it was a B plus attempt or whatever.
Oh, well, I mean, I think everyone has their own perspective, but I think like we're going in the right direction, right? Because I think this was a great year because we just opened that new facility. We have a rick house that changes the game. We came out with a bourbon that is $55 on the shelf that is going to be blended for consistency. That is I think it's incredible for the price point. I think it over delivers. So just those things alone, I think we're doing great. I think also us kind of course correcting in a way that's like we're going to come out with 2 batches a year, no more than that, and they're going to be limited. We're going to make them 2,000 cases max. We're going to come out with 2 cask finish bourbons a year. We're going to start kind of consolidating our core portfolio and our release schedule so people know what to expect and when to expect it instead of just like throwing everything out into the market just because the market wants it. And I think next year is going to be an even better year too. So I think we're starting to like kind of fill in to what we are now 10 years later. I think we've learned our lessons, and I think this was a successful year. We're just growing at a pace that is honestly beautiful to see over the course of the last 3 years that I worked here.
Yeah, and it feels like the there's a core identity that Barrel has been chasing for a long time, and that's been understood of who you are. But it also looks like there's been a great amount of experimentation to sort of fill out the edges of what that identity is. And to me, 2023 reads as the year where you've sort of fully realized this is the brand identity we are now. We're going
Mhm.
to shore up the things that we do really, really well, and you've solidified a couple of locations, like you said, with your blending facility and your rick house. You've uh, adjusted prices. You've entered into new pricing markets. You've done a host of things that show a high degree of maturity from a brand that is only 10 years old. And um, I think the scariest thing for me as a consumer is the risk of being purchased by somebody much much larger, right? Because this is also a growing trend that happens, is that um, a brand sits around for about 10 years and they build themselves into a really successful engine, and then the Diageos and Camparis of the world show up with a bucket of money and say, hey, we would like to buy you. And I mean, it's business is business, but then there are concerns from the consumer standpoint that come along. But I would agree, wildly successful year. I do want to go back to one question. So you've got the retail facility at the blending facility. If I show up over there, is there an opportunity to do tours at this point, or is that was just a like open house? We did a tour, and now we're going to shut it back down. We're going to do retail sales.
I honestly don't know, like, what the
Hmm.
plan is right now, no, because they're still building out some parts of the facility so that they just don't have the team to be able to, like, host people there
Hmm.
currently. And, like, just it's been we opened it in September, it's the end of the year. I don't know if when that is going to be, if you show up for a tour, but I just know you can show up to buy bottles for sure. I don't know about the tours, though.
Gotcha.
I don't know when that's gonna change either. Hopefully sometime next year, but I'm not sure. So,
But if you sign up for the email, you'll find out when it happens,
yeah, exactly. The
right?
newsletter. Go
It,
on
yeah,
barrelbourbon.com, sign up for our newsletter. It's actually a very, very good newsletter. It's very
yeah. No, it's not like I'm not one that's much for newsletters, but it is because sometimes it's a whole lot of fluff and not a lot of information, but it feels very intentionally put together,
yeah.
which most everything you guys do, it's very intentionally put together with useful information, the appropriate kind of marketing stuff, and then understanding what's happening with and around the brand. And there's been a couple times where something will come out and I'll read it in the newsletter, and then I reach out to Aaron. I'm like, hey, what about this? And he's like, oh yeah, hey, here's this thing, right? And so it's pretty in real time. um I
Almost
appreciate.
too real time because
Yeah,
people are
sometimes it
like,
is.
"Hey,
Yeah, if you get
this
ahead of those
item
guys.
still hasn't hit." Like, our distributor, sometimes the item is, like, still inbounding, and
Mhm.
then all the accounts are like, "I want this now," and they're like, "2 more weeks." And they're like, "Hey, can you not release the newsletter yet?" We're like, "Nope, sorry. Be
Yeah,
fast."
so just tell the retailer that they need to press upon their local representatives to eliminate the three-tier system, and then you can get it to them faster, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That'd be a lot easier.
It would
But
be
I
quicker. I
think
don't
a
know.
lot of our
Easier, maybe not, because it adds more logistics into your world.
we would need
But
to hire a bunch of more people.
yeah. Um, so I really, really appreciate the time that you've given me this afternoon. If there's anything else that you want to talk about, you tell me right now and we'll go that direction. But if not, um, I was just super thankful for the opportunity.
Awesome. I know that we mentioned that Fred Minnick picked batch 35
Yep.
and dry batch 4, but I just want to highlight some new press that came out last week. So batch 35 was at number 11 in Whiskey Advocate's top 20 exciting whiskeys of 2023. So don't sleep on batch 35. And then also New Year Bourbon was written up by Wall Street Journal this weekend. And we sold about 300 bottles just over the weekend on the website. So New Year Bourbon is great. You should not sleep on New Year Bourbon either. So both of them.
You're exactly right, and this is what I get. I had work travel all last week, and so I have not been able to keep up with any of my information. So I'm trying to run off of stuff, and I didn't even like I the batch 35 news that made sense to me. Like I'd heard that one and just forgot it, but I didn't hear about the Wall Street Journal stuff for New Year. That's
Yeah, it's because it's hiding behind a paywall sometimes, you know?
right. Well, I mean, it usually gets shared amongst the whiskey nerds. Somebody will get access to it and they'll screenshot a page and send it around. And I hadn't come across that yet, but that is some phenomenal recognition. And I'd say they got it right. Sometimes the larger publications that aren't spirits based can make some real wild guesses as to what's good. They're right on this one. So, who at the distillery or in the brand? Sorry, who in the brand has the obsession with outer space?
Joe. Joe
Okay.
Beatrice. Yeah.
Okay. Because whenever we were in there, I was walking through and I was looking at some of the names that are on the bottles in the blending facility, right? And so they're all like constellations or stars or planets or whatever. And there's like pollux and I was like, okay, so I'm putting this in my brain. I'm coming back and asking this question. Like
Yeah.
somebody is a space nerd, and I appreciate it thoroughly.
Well, Stellum, all of our single barrels are
Mhm.
organized like based on mash bill and flavor profile, but they're organized into lots of barrels that
Mhm.
correlate with like clusters of stars. So like clusters of barrels, clusters of stars, or
Yep.
constellations. So that's why there's like Pollux, Leo, uh, Cygnus. There was like Serpens for Rye. So they're all. Joe loved space and nerded out with the constellations and likes astrology and astronomy. So kind of bring that into naming different clusters of barrels.
Yeah, and I knew it was around the Stellum, but I was not trying to ask. I didn't want to ask specifically about Stellum because Stellum's a whole other series of conversation. But I noticed that they were all on the Stellum bottles. But I was like, I enjoy this, and I was talking to David from Whiskey My Wedding Ring. He noticed the same thing because he's the same degree of nerdy as well. He's like, "What's this about?" I don't know, but I'm gonna ask.
Yeah, I love that too about Joe with the stars and the
Yeah,
constellations I think it's a very smart way of like organizing. I mean,
it makes sense. It
barrels and
absolutely makes sense.
books together. You're just like, right, these are going over here and those are labeled Pollux and these are going over
Mhm.
here and those are labeled Leo and they're entirely different flavor profiles. So when we're pulling for blends, we'll like pull from
Mhm.
these and pull from these. Um, they're all different. So Stellum single barrels, all available. You can get your own named Perseus, Pollux, Leo, whatever you'd like. Uh, those are MGP though. Stellum
Mhm.
single barrels, MGP, 75-21-4. And then the Rise are 95-5.
When we did the very first one, I developed every question I could around Barrel or Stellum or anything that was involved. Um, so, and feel free to not answer this, but it seems like in the last few months I've heard less out of Stellum than maybe the this time last year.
Yeah.
Sometimes that happens with a brand whenever they're considering a relaunch or a new initiative or something. Was this in deference to the foundation release or just by the nature of the way Stellan built its brand?
So I think with Stellum, I think we're still like finding our footing with Stellum, but we're moving Stellum into more of a custom blend and single barrel brand. So instead of blending Stellum bourbon and Stellum rye, we're going to be blending uh, custom blends for like we did one for Whole Foods this year, some anyone that wants to order like more than 100 cases of
Mhm.
12. Like, so if you are a group or restaurant group or you have national accounts and you want to blend something like that on that scale, we definitely will do a private blend for you. And then we also have single barrels always available. So that's where you're seeing like the Pollux and the Perseus. So we're kind of pivoting Stellum into custom blend and single barrel. It's like our custom brand. So you can buy 5-year old, five to actually like 6 and change-year-old MGP at this point. That's 75, 21 4, and then 95 5 for the rye mash bill. But those might change. We might get different barrels in there. But if you want a single barrel and you want it to retail for $55 on the shelf, I would go with Stellum. And they're all cash strength, so they're not 100 proof like foundation,
Mhm.
but they're truly single barrels. And we're not going to be blending until it's like a bigger custom blend. So we're pivoting away from that. And then we were able to use a lot of those barrels to develop foundation. And we thought that foundation was a little bit more important for the market.
Mhm. And so just Stellum came about, you guys have the Barrel brand, and Stellum just sort of kind of pops up. Is this a result of having a quantity of barrels that might not fit into whatever your current blending effort is, and you wanted a way to kind of get rid of them? Or is this like an intentional, we're going to have Barrel and we're going to have Stellum and we're doing something specific with Stellum?
I think the latter, to be honest.
Mhm.
We I think we thought we wanted to do something different with Stellum than actually happened. But we realized that we would prefer to use those barrels into like barrel blends. Like even
Mhm.
Stellum bourbon and Stellum rye, those core blends, they were just as good as a barrel batch. Maybe like having mostly younger whiskeys in them. I know the Stellum bourbon had 4 to 16-year-old bourbons in it. We definitely wanted to use some of the older stock to blend into barrel instead of
Mhm.
just continuing to kind of launch the Stellum line. But
Okay. Yeah, and so it, having a secondary line can be a distraction for some people, and I think about some brands that are in Tennessee or almost in Ohio, that are in this state, that have ran the dual brand approach, and one can ultimately become a distraction for the other. Um, what it looks like, and based off of how you're describing the refocus of the intent, is it looks like that you're protecting yourself from having that sort of a distraction from a brand level. Is that, Barrel is the brand and Stellum is this thing that is a business function. It does something else, but it's, with the custom blending, that's, I think that I like that. That's a thing I haven't seen too many people doing that. And then single barrels as well. And that's the thing that I still see a pretty good quantity of floating around, is the single barrels. But there was the Equinox and the Fibonacci and the Hunter's Moon and all of these things that sort of came out of what it felt like nowhere, right? And I'll tell you, my initial concern was that Stellum was going to be the new thing and that Barrel was going to go away, and that didn't happen, right? So we're all happy, all the nerds rejoiced, um, but it's sort of an interesting experiment, I think.
yeah, I mean, who those custom blends though, to be honest, the Lone Cypress and the Fibonacci, as a rye fan, those are my favorite. Some of my favorite things we've ever blended. I love the Lone Cypress. Like if you can find a bottle of that, like whatever's out there is out there at this point. We're not blending it again. But if you could find a bottle, I would pick one up. They are fantastic blends. I
Mhm.
just think that when you have a $90 bottle of Stellum versus a $90 bottle of Barrel, it's like competing against the same price point.
Mhm.
We tried something and we blended really great whiskey. And sometimes you pivot.
Yeah.
And I'm not there behind the doors making the decisions and kind of understanding why the decisions are being made. I'm out here selling the whiskey, so I get to taste people on it and taste consumers on the whiskey. And anyone that I tasted on Lone Cypress bought Lone Cypress in. It's very, very good. And those Hunter's Moon too, Hunter's Moon and Equinox, those bourbons are fantastic. They're just blends of straight bourbon that are done in a smaller scale than a barrel bourbon batch. So I would say it's like a quarter of the size of a barrel bourbon batch. So limited releases on those. And if you like something like a bourbon to drink with whiskey, drink with cigars, I would say Stellan Black bourbon. I used to recommend that as a cigar pairing because it's got that like really nice, like kind of savory, darker chocolate. It came in at around 109. It was like built on the Cellum bourbon blend, but layered in with older bourbons. So if you still see those in market, please pick those bottles up. They're
Mhm.
a steal for the quantity versus the price on those. But
So what kind of cigar should I be pairing with this? Like, so it sounds like you know a little bit about cigars. Am I looking for like a dark cigar or a light cigar? Like what kind of cigar should I be after?
I don't really know much about cigars, but
Okay.
I did a few cigar events this year
Hmm.
where I actually smoked a cigar.
Uh-huh.
Correct. So I'm not really, I smoked, I learned about like Connecticut leaf or
Hmm.
something, Connecticut wrap. I learned about, I think one of them was New Dorado,
Hmm.
something about a New Dorado. I have no idea. This is not my forte. Maybe one day I'll learn about cigars. I feel like that's the next thing, right? I came from
Yeah,
one,
that seems to be
now
the
maybe
transition is
cigars.
it's whiskey and cigar. They're pairing whiskey and pizza, and they're not wrong because I've yet to be at a whiskey event where pizza didn't eventually show up. Right, so
Yep.
that's about how it usually goes. Um,
Yeah, I just did a seminar in Jersey where we tasted through at least six whiskeys, and then I had some stuff in the bag for anyone that wanted to taste other stuff. And then all of a sudden, six pizzas walked through the door. So you're not wrong.
so if you're putting together a tasting with a pairing, what do you usually do?
Like for a restaurant or
Just in general, Lindsay's hosting people at her house. She's doing a whiskey tasting. What's your pairing to go with the whiskey, or does it vary by whiskey?
it probably varies by whiskey, but I think like especially with the cash strength whiskey, something a little, I want to include something a little bit heartier. So like I think pork belly pairs really well with like some richer style whiskeys. I think even just like with seagrass too, which is got those fruit and floral notes, like you can pair that with like a lighter course, like a salad with some of something fatty in it though, or like cheese or burrata, like seagrass can kind of cut through the fat of that. Short ribs we've done with steaks, we've done lamb. So even like a fish dish that has like a nice, like richer style broth, like tomato and like something that's like heavier in style, like a cioppino, I feel like you could pair with some of the whiskeys. I wouldn't do like something really light because I think the whiskey would just like completely overpair it. But
Mhm.
sometimes, like as long as you have a piece of protein, but it's really the accompaniments that kind of pair with the whiskey and the fat in the dish.
Yeah, we absolutely should have started with this because I'm like making notes over here of what I need to be eating with my whiskey now because um, it's more rare for me to just drink whiskey than it is to drink whiskey while a meal or appetizers or a cocktail party or whatever. And you get your standard. You go to any of these things, you get your standard. There's going to be a charcuterie plate, and there's going to
Yeah,
be pretzels or crackers or corn chips or whatever. But trying to find something that's a little bit different is nice. And so I've got a long list of things to try to pair with whiskey here, so that way I can inform.
chocolate.
Yeah, chocolate.
My coworker John Bundy did a tasting at one of his accounts. He bought a bunch of different chocolate bars and like broke off pieces and like paired it with different whiskeys and did it as an in-store tasting. So it works really well with different types of chocolate. Because you get like some with some of our bourbons, you get and whiskeys, you get some of our like that bittersweet cooking chocolate, but then other ones you get
Mhm.
like milk chocolate, different chocolate, different styles of chocolate. So that could be
Yeah,
a
I get
good.
a lot of dark chocolates. A lot of times on dark whiskeys, I get dark chocolate, and that may be just me wanting the bitter flavor because I like super dark chocolate. Um, but yeah,
That's why I really like the 10-year anniversary blend. I get a lot of that like really rich dark chocolate from that.
mhm. All right, now I'm hungry.
Me too.
All right, I do need to cut there. I've got to hop to another meeting here in about 15 minutes, and I've got to switch back into my day job brain. Um, so, uh, if you've got anything else you want to share, if you've got some links or whatever, go ahead and share them here, and we'll cut it out.
Perfect. If you want to follow us, like John said, you can sign up for our newsletter at barrelbourbon.com. Don't forget the second L in barrel, and sign up online. And then you can also follow us on Instagram at Barrel Bourbon. And I think we're on TikTok and we're on Twitter or X now. And we're on Facebook too. And we post all of our events on our Facebook and our Instagram. So at the beginning of every week, there's a ton of events all over the country right now going on because we're all out there in stores, at restaurants, doing tastings. And there's a large team of us. So please stop by, say hi at the events. We'd love to know that you listen to John.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for your time. Look forward to talking to you again. I imagine we'll probably have another conversation here in the next few months as this Mizunara hits the marketplace and any other fun and unique things that Barrel happens to do. I've said it a bunch of times, and I can absolutely be accused of being a shill for Barrel bourbon and Barrel craft spirit specifically because I really, really do enjoy everything that you guys do. And I appreciate the time that you take to come and sit down and chat with me.
Of course. Thank you so much for everything that you do for our brand. And I hope you enjoy the bourbons this holiday season too.
Thanks for tuning in to this offering from the Embellish podcast. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a review on whatever platform that you have to be consuming this on. Leave a comment if possible. Hit me up on social media on TikTok or Instagram using Embellish Pod. Give me a follow so you can keep up with what's going on here. I can be found at www.embellishpod.com with all of my links, accounts, contact details, and more. Thanks for stopping by.